This is the Ark of the Covenant, the confirmation of the covenant. We are now leaving Jerusalem after our incident with Shomer Levan and the cave of no price in East Jerusalem. Within a few days, I am back in America, and I then call up Ron Wyatt and say, Ron, I would like to bring an artist with me from the state of Texas, and I would like to get some details concerning the Ark of the Covenant. And so Ron invited me to come over, and with me I brought Richard Fike. Richard Fike is an artist, and we went to visit Ron, and I knew that Jim Pinkowski had done a lot of the graphic work for Ron in the past, but Ron also indicated that there's some things concerning the Ark that weren't quite accurate, and so I asked if we could I could bring an artist with me, and so we brought some modeling clay, and I said, now Ron, I promise I'm not going to make a dashboard model of the Ark of the Covenant. That's not what this is all about. I just want to make sure that we've got all the details on this correctly. And those of you who are watching this by way of video and the introduction see you have a couple of angels that are representative of the Ark of the Covenant as far as the graphics for this series. But you'll notice that these angels representing the Ark of the Covenant are represented so many different ways, and it doesn't take much of a tour of the land of Israel to see so many different representations. Some look like birds, some look like angels. They're just all over the map. A number of years ago, a gentleman who is the ancestor of Jewish arm makers in Spain showed me a sword that he had, and in just the last couple of years, I was able to procure one of these swords. This is called the Sword of Solomon. This was made by Jewish sword makers in Toledo, Spain. There are only two sword makers left in Toledo, Spain, and they are both Jewish families. You will see on the hilt of the Sword of Solomon, on one side we have the menorah. If we can get a close-up of that, we have the menorah. But on the other side, we've got something significant. One, we have the guarding cherub on each side of the hilt here. This is what was seen in a cave, chiseled in Zedekiah's cave, a half-carved representation, the head of a man, the wings of an eagle, and the body of a lion. This is referred to as the guarding cherub. And on the opposite side of each side of this guarding cherub is a representation of the Ark of the Covenant, but the angels are on each side of it, not on top of the Ark. Now, these Jewish sword makers understood, Sephardic Jews, they understood more about the Ark of the Covenant, and they represented it right here. And after my time with Ron, then I took that representation, and you will find that on The Great Secret of Solomon's Temple. It's a 2.5-hour video that details the hiding of the Ark of the Covenant, what happened at the crucifixion, its location, and how it relates to the confirmation of the covenant. And with that 2.5-hour video, there's no way that in the next hour I'm going to be able to relate all of the details of those things. And so I'm going to leave you to get that video on The Great Secret of Solomon's Temple. After that, I left again to go to Israel. When I returned, I went back to the state of Texas, and then I got a call from someone asking me if I knew anything about this situation. It was reported that there were 6 soldiers that were killed while attempting to retrieve an archaeological artifact. They asked me if I knew anything about it, and if it had anything to do with the Ark of the Covenant. I said, I haven't heard anything about it, and they said that they were reading it in the paper where they were, and wanted to know about it. I said, I have no idea. And so a couple days passed, and this kept on bothering me, so I called up Ron Wyatt, and I said, do you know anything about This report of 6 Israeli soldiers being dead while attempting to retrieve an archaeological artifact. He was quiet for a minute, and he said, "Is there any way that you can come over?" I said, "I'll be there." "When?" "Tomorrow." "Fine." So another drive from Dallas, Texas, Austin, Texas, and I get over to Wyatt's place and meet him down at the museum at this point. And then he said, "Where did you hear about this?" And I said, "I just got a phone call from somebody that's out there on the Prophecy Club tour, and I don't really know them, but they said that they had read this and wanted to know if I knew anything about it." And so he said that, well, this is the situation that happened. He went over to Israel, and they were doing some work out in the desert with the subsurface radar interface equipment. And just to keep in good contact with the Department of Antiquities and what goes on in Jerusalem, stay in their good graces, because, he had found some significant things in the land of Israel. Ron, while at the beach down at Ashkelon, was the one who found the burial pots of the Philistines, something that Kathleen Kenyon, the great archaeologist, searched for with bulldozers and could not find. He actually, while swimming, stumbled upon them out in the waters at low tide, and that's how they found them. And so there's just amazing things that happened in Ron's life that opened the door for him to do what he did in the land of Israel. So he stopped by in Israel, in Jerusalem. The Department of Antiquities is also called the Rockefeller Museum, which may give you an idea why when you go in the door, you will see artifacts there, man-made artifacts from 33,000 years ago. Oh, that's amazing. 33,000 years ago, yes. And I think they were done by Peter Pan and Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck 33 years ago. Anyway, that's where they're coming from, okay? So he stopped in to see if there's anything that he might be able to do. He's got this big equipment in the land right now, anything he can do. And they said, well, there is something you may be able to help us out with. So Aaron was relating this. This is what he told me. They took him down to Zedekiah's cave. They had it all closed off. They had army vehicles outside of the gate there. This is in East Jerusalem. It was just all secured, locked down, went down there, and they had all the lights on, and they had a lot of military personnel down there. And they explained to him that they sent 6 men in because this was a time that they were, according to the Oslo Peace Accord and these subsequent things that happened, according to this, Israel was supposed to turn over East Jerusalem to the Palestinians for their capital in the exchange for peace, and part of the Temple Mount was to go over to the Pope. This is what this whole thing was all about, that East Jerusalem was to go over into the hands of the Palestinians. Well, where the Ark of the Covenant is, they really can't allow that to happen at this particular point in time. And so they went down from Zedekiah's cave, down in there, where Ron spent 7 years searching for the original route into where, how they got the ark where it was. Because remember, it has to get from Solomon's temple down into the Temple Mount, through the cave system, down into the stone sarcophagus where the Ark of the Covenant was found. And so Ron, digging from another way, found it, but knew he could never get it out. They could never get out. That's why the whole thing for the Jeremiah's grotto, attempting to buy that, and then shutting down the bus station, and then going in that way. These different things were tried during a several-year period of time because the time frame for this turning over East Jerusalem was coming upon them. So Ron went down there, and they explained how they sent 6 men in to retrieve the Ark of the Covenant, and that was 2 days before, and nobody wants to go in, and we haven't heard a thing from them. And so Ron said that he went into the passageway, and found there a man who was in white woven linen garments, and he was laying on the ground. He rolled him over, and he had both eyes crossed. He said, now, when you have a stroke in the left side of your brain, your right eye will cross, and vice versa. This man had both eyes crossed, which, as a nurse anesthetist, indicated to him that the man died of a double stroke. He went further in and found another one laying there, same condition. He came back out, they told what the situation was, and so what they did was they brought in some baskets to retrieve them. These are like the mesh baskets that's on the side of a chopper or a Jeep where you bring out combat survivors and the wounded in these. They're fairly lightweight. He tied a rope onto one end of this. He dragged it back in there and described everything that he did. That, he had to roll it over on the side, then he put the man up on the side, rolled him into it, and then had him start pulling out. As they pulled it out, then the body rolled out. And so he had to stay stooped over, holding onto the head while they pulled on the other end. And it took them all day long to get 6 bodies out of there. He said, I didn't go back in to where the ark was. I was afraid. I had no idea what was going on. And then he said, can you see if you can find out where this guy got this news? I said, I can't even remember who it was that called me. It was that, he called, asked about this. I didn't know. That was the end of it. But then it kept on bothering me for a couple of days, so I called you. And he said, I don't think we really ought to talk about this, but see if you can find out where this leak came out, what this is all about. And so, nothing happened. I went on back to Israel, and then I related the whole thing. I wanted to visit Shomer again at his home. I related the whole thing to Shomer. Now, I'm going to Israel during each one of the feasts. I'm staying there for a month, 2 months, sometimes 3 months, and then I turn around and I would come back to America. This was it. I needed to be in Israel for the feast, and every time I went, there were just incredible divine appointments for me at that time. I came back home, and then I went back up to the next feast. And so now we've got, a course of a few years in which this has taken place. And then Shomer came into town, and he said, this is the revelation that Yohanan got, that we are to go up to Jerusalem and go to the Department of Antiquities and volunteer to go in and get the Ark of the Covenant. Now, so he's telling me this. I think, okay, now this is really weird. Yohanan, he's like 80 years old. I don't know if he's hitting on all 8 cylinders or not, okay. But they come up to Jerusalem. They're wearing their white linen jalabias. They look like people out of the Old West Jerusalem, 2,000 years ago. And they go to the Department of Antiquities, the Rockefeller Museum, and they ask to speak to the head of the Department of Antiquities about the Ark of the Covenant. And so, the secretary there is relating that, yeah, right. And so she goes in and speaks to him and says, there are 2 men out here dressed in white, and they say they've come to talk to you about the Ark of the Covenant. And so, unbelievably, they get ushered in. They come in and sit down, and then they start telling the story. We know that 6 men went in to retrieve the Ark of the Covenant to get it out of where it is before East Jerusalem has to be handed over into the hands of the Palestinians. We know that this has transpired and that we have come to volunteer to take the Ark of the Covenant out. He said the man stopped, he walked out of the room and brought in 4 other people and sat down. And he said, I want you to tell them this story. And so I went through this thing again. They all listened to it, just sat there and listened to the whole thing, and said, well, we'll let you know. And so they were dismissed. And so they tell me this story, and it's like, well, we'll let you know. We'll let you know. But, it's just strange that he would go out and get these other people. They came in and sat there just completely silent, didn't say anything the whole time, and then we're just dismissed with, well, we'll let you know. Just like blowing them off. But yet, they was serious enough to where these people were there, or seemed so. Or maybe they were just there to witness people that needed to be committed to an asylum. You don't know. You don't know. Okay? And so they went back home, and a month later, they came back up and said, we know we're supposed to go in there again. This time, they go in, they speak to the secretary, and immediately she calls up, and immediately they're let in. Now that is saying something. Immediately, they're let in. And then they start telling more of the story. Now it ends there, because no one calls them up to remove the Ark of the Covenant. Two guys aren't going to do it, for one thing, okay? But just this knocking on the door at the Department of Antiquities, and for them to seriously take them to where when they come back, they are immediately let into the inner chamber to again meet with them, that, to me, said something significant. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about the story as I have received it. As the Ark of the Covenant is the most holy artifact on planet Earth. It is representative of the Creator's throne in heaven. In heaven, you've got beasts with 4 heads that when they shout holy, the universe shakes. They've got 6 wings. They've got eyes all around. The Ark of the Covenant, which typifies the throne in heaven, doesn't have that. It's got 2 angels with the 2 wings that cross up across the back, 2 wings down in front, literally forming the throne. So Moses was told to build the ark according to the pattern that he'd seen in heaven. He is not there to make images of those awesome beasts that cry holy before the throne. But it is still the representation of the throne of the Almighty upon the earth. The Ark of the Covenant, one day in the year, is to be approached by the high priest. He goes in with the blood of bulls and with the blood of one of the twin goats. First of all, with the blood of bulls, he is to take in incense, a fire pan full of smoky incense from the altar of incense, placing it before the Ark of the Covenant. As he faces the Ark of the Covenant, the wings of the angels form the back of the seat. He's literally before the throne of the Almighty. He is to take the blood of goats, of bulls, which is the atonement for himself, his sons, and the nation, and he is to sprinkle it with his right index finger 7 times on the east end of the Ark of the Covenant, which would represent the left hand end of the throne in heaven. All the time, 7 times, every year, 7 times only on the east end of the Ark of the Covenant. Just about every representation you see of the Ark of the Covenant out there is wrong, except for what we see here on the Jewish sword maker's Sword of Solomon, and what you see in the great Secret of Solomon's Temple. Remember, the poles that were used to carry the ark. In Solomon's Temple, it says they drew the staves out to one end so that the ark could be seen out in the holy place, but they weren't seen out in the holy place. What does that mean? It is that the staves pushed the curtain out so it could be seen that the ark is in place. The staves pushed the curtain out on each side of the altar of incense so that the ark could be seen out in the holy place, but couldn't be seen out in the holy place. That's the only way that it can be seen and not be seen. You know it's there. And the high priest goes in and sprinkles the blood on the east end, which is the left-hand side of the ark. Then comes the time of Nebadon Siege, which we read about in 2 Maccabees chapter 2, verses 2 and following, where Jeremiah and several of the faithful priests received a vision to hide the Ark of the Covenant, to take it out toward the place where Moses spied the Holy Land. But remember, the siege wall is all the way around Jerusalem. They're not going to get through the siege wall. But how are they going to get it out? This is how they know, because they receive a revelation of how to activate the sand hydraulic elevator system. Now, after I went down to Egypt and now constructed this with the help of John Fiala, now the question remained, what was the mechanism, the apparatus that was used for these two brass pillars standing out in front of the temple, that it says the capitals, which are solid brass, hundreds of tons sitting on top of 31-foot columns, why are they 5 cubits tall? And then after the siege, they're only 3 cubits tall. But when they break down the brass capitals, destroy them and carry the brass away into Babylon, the capitals are 5 cubits again. Because 2 cubits, 42 inches had sunk down inside of these hollow capitals, activating the hydraulic sand elevator system so they could get the Ark of the Covenant off the Temple Mount through the cave system and put it in a stone sarcophagus that Solomon had constructed so the Ark would remain there for a long, long period of time. Now we go 1,000 years into the future. In the stone roadbed outside of Damascus Gate, where all the executions took place, on that day, which is the 14th day of the month of the Aviv, while the Passover lambs were being sacrificed on the Temple Mount, the Lamb of God was outside the north gate of the city of Jerusalem, outside the gate, outside the camp, where an altar in stone was constructed, and this is where the Almighty set it all in place. When Yeshua cried with a loud voice, "It is finished," the earthquake and the rocks rent. The ground was open at his feet. Yohanan, standing there, saw as a Roman soldier came up and pierced his side. Out of his side flowed blood and water. It went out of his side, down the earthquake crack, and the earthquake broke open the stone sarcophagus, and the blood of Yeshua fell on the west end of the Ark of the Covenant, which is the right hand of the throne of the Almighty. That is what John saw. And I, John, saw this. He saw when the Spirit, which had descended upon him and remained upon him, then when he said, "It is finished," the Spirit left down upon the Ark of the Covenant, followed by the water and the blood. And this he said, there are 3 that bear record in the earth, the Spirit, the water, and the blood, and these 3 agree. If we have received the testimony of men, the testimony that God gave of his Son is greater than the testimony of men. And this testimony, the Spirit, the water, and the blood, this is a testimony that God gave of his Son. That is when, as Yeshua said, this cup represents the renewed covenant in my blood. I will pay the death penalty for you. You broke the blood covenant. I never broke the covenant. I will die in your place and thereby renew the covenant offered at Mount Sinai for you to be priests and kings. And in Revelation chapter 1, Yeshua has now made us priests and kings because he paid the death penalty for us. The Ark of the Covenant still sits there and will be there until the Almighty reveals this, because that is when the covenant will be confirmed. This is what Daniel speaks of. By revelation, the angel gives him this very revelation. And he, the Messiah, will confirm the covenant with many for 1 7. In the midst of the 7, now that he is the prince that shall come. That prince that shall come is the one who will bring the abomination of desolation. That prince that shall come, because they receive not the love of the truth, it says in Thessalonians that God will send them a strong delusion that they might believe the lie. What is the lie? He just got through saying it. This day of the Messiah's coming will not transpire, except first there come the rebellious stand, and the man of sin is revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God, so that he as God sits on the ark of the covenant of God, proclaiming that he is God. Because they did not receive the love of the truth, he, the Almighty, will give them this delusion. How can he sit on the Ark of the Covenant and not die? Because those who do not want to believe the truth will be allowed to believe a lie. And that is the beginning of the last 3.5. Ladies and gentlemen, the confirmation of the covenant has not yet transpired. The confirmation of the covenant is going to transpire at the end of the existential war against Israel, in which the Almighty, if he did not intervene, Israel would no longer exist. I would like to pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for what your Son, Yeshua, has done for us, what you orchestrated throughout all time. And now we dedicate ourselves in your service and in his service, and that we will go forth in this time and we will do your will. We will do what Yeshua said to do, get the gospel of the kingdom out to the world. Energize us to do so. In the name of Yeshua, amen. Now we're going to give you an opportunity to stand with us. Help get this message out to the entire world. This is your opportunity, and our opportunity is about to end. This is your 2 minutes. Make a decision and go for it. We see many times in the scriptures that there's more than one fulfillment to any given prophecy, such as the Feast of Tabernacles reminds us of when we tabernacled with the Almighty in the wilderness. It also then looks forward to when Yeshua came and the Word is made flesh and tabernacled among us. But it's still not fulfilled, because yet It says that everyone will come up to Jerusalem while Yahovah, the Messiah, Yahovah Sabaoth, the Messiah, reigns from Jerusalem. Everyone will celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles because the King is tabernacling among us. But it's still not fulfilled until the end of the book of Revelation. There's a new heaven and a new earth in which the Father, the Son, now tabernacle and make their tabernacling with us forever. It is a forever fulfillment of the Feast of Tabernacles. And so when I hear people say, well, do we have to keep the Feast of Tabernacles? No. No, it's a rehearsal for tabernacling with him forever. Maybe you want to rehearse going to hell. Do I have to? It's a party! Well, part of the party is getting to know the Almighty through the intricacies of His Word, and that there's more than one fulfillment of these things. And this is what was discovered in 40 years of working on the chronological Gospels. And then being able to then describe all of these things in the small representation of a chart which is really 12 foot long for me. So others have smaller versions of Yeshua's life and ministry to get all this detail. Because we have inherited a lie from the time of the 4th century in which Eusebius, who was the champion of Constantine the heretic, who wrote the oration in exaltation of the Emperor Constantine, Eusebius, who was the bishop or overseer of the twisted assembly in Caesarea, it was Eusebius who, denying 300 years, more than 300 years of testimony from the apostles, the disciples of the apostles, the disciples of the disciples of the disciples of the apostles, for 300 years, not one dissenting opinion among the early church historians, church fathers, that Yeshua's ministry was about 1 year. And yet Eusebius, in the 4th century, concocts this ridiculous, asinine, if you please, 3.5-year ministry, which destroys any possibility of ever understanding the gospel record and Yeshua's life and ministry. It is only after the restoration of the ancient biblical calendar and then putting together all of the detail concerning this in the chronological Gospels, after NASA putting the mirrors on the moon, shining the laser beams off them, everything that it took to calculate the lunation period and then roll that back in time, and now we can roll that calendar back and we can find the first day of the first month in every month in Yeshua's ministry. It's all there. But now we go back to Daniel chapter 9. Daniel, who is praying about the end of this 490-year dearth in which we never kept the Sabbath year, in which, according to Moses' prophecy, we owed 70 years in captivity. He knows that the time of this desolation is about to come to end. He is praying. The Almighty sends an angel, and the angel, after his greeting, tells Daniel the detail. 77s are determined upon thy people and upon the holy city, to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and the prophet, seal up or to authenticate the prophet, and to anoint the most holy. It's going to take 77s to do this, and I'm going to show this to you on 2 layers. One, which was impossible to find until the restoration of the ancient biblical calendar. It could be guessed at, but now we can nail it to the day, ladies and gentlemen. Yeshua's ministry was exactly 70 weeks, 490 days. From the day he was mikvahed by Yochanan, and the Spirit in the form of a dove came and remained on him, which was the sign that Yochanan was given by the one to whom it was revealed to him that he who the Spirit remains on will be the one who baptized with the Holy Spirit and with fire. And John said, I saw it. This is the one. And then he said, I heard a voice from heaven saying, this is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased. From that day until the day that Yeshua mikvah or baptized his followers with the Holy Spirit 490 days, 70 weeks. And it could not be known in any previous generation. All we had to do is to do a little research and find out that a fictitious Feast of Passover was inserted in where is now John 6:4 that did not exist in any of the text of John before the end of the 4th century. A Passover Yeshua never goes to. He feeds 5,000 and another 4,000 with leavened barley loaves. Pharisees are not in Jerusalem for the feast. Thousands of Yeshua's followers in the Galilee are not at the feast. A whole synagogue in Capernaum several days later is not in Jerusalem for the feast. He never goes to the feast. Why? Matthew, Mark, and Luke says it's at the end of the summer, just before the Feast of Tabernacles, which takes place in the same chapter. John, it's still at the end of the summer. And the next chapter, he's going to the Feast of Tabernacles. This fictitious Passover was added by scribes to deliberately poison and destroy the continuity of the scriptures. But thankfully, the Almighty watches over his word. He will not let his word be destroyed. Oh, he'll let comics come up with good news for modern man and the complete Yiddish Bible and all sorts of nonsense out there. But he will not allow the seekers of truth to be left without a witness of the truth. Yeshua's ministry is 70 weeks, so let's watch how this is. Know therefore and understand, because this is one of the layers. I'm going to show you 2 layers here very quickly, ladies and gentlemen. It is illustrated and published every year in the back of the astronomically and agriculturally corrected biblical Hebrew calendar. This is layer 1. Know this therefore and understand, from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem unto Messiah the Prince will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The street will be built again, the plaza even in troublous times. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with the flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even unto the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. So we have 70 weeks. We have 62 weeks. We have after 62 weeks. We have 1 week. We have in the midst of the week. All these are resident in this prophecy. Now let me show you how it works out in Yeshua's life and ministry. From the day he is mikvahed through the 62nd week, the end of the 62nd week is Shabbat. It is that year, it is Aviv 10. It is on Shabbat Yeshua makes his triumphal entry into Jerusalem. The after 62 weeks, the 63rd week, that 1 week starts the next day. Yeshua is cut off in the midst of the week. Wednesday was the 14th day of the month of the Aviv that year. That is when Yeshua was executed on that day. He was sacrificed as the Lamb of God, as the Passover lambs were being sacrificed. When the last Passover lamb was sacrificed, by tradition, the high priest wet his lips, filled his lungs with air, and made the final proclamation when the last Passover lamb, the one selected for the whole nation, the one he personally selected, that was staked on the Temple Mount for 4 days, and everyone in the nation tried to find fault with him. When that lamb finally was sacrificed, the high priest cried out, "It is finished." And when Yeshua knew his hour was come, he said, "I thirst." They put the wine to his mouth. He pulled back one last time, pushed up with all his might, filled his lungs with air, and he cried out the words of the high priest, "It is finished." He bowed his head. He gave up the ghost. The earth quaked, the rocks rent. And then when they pierced his side, his blood flowed down that earthquake crack onto the west end of the Ark of the Covenant, sealing our redemption, paying the price. And that testimony still remains in the earth to be revealed in the last days at the confirmation of the covenant. He is in the grave 3 days and 3 nights. He is raised on the weekly Sabbath. That's why when the women came to the grave early the first day of the week, which is Yom HaBikurim, the day of the first fruits, it was still dark and he was already gone. When did he get up? On the 4th night? No, the 3rd day on the Sabbath. When he arose, those saints in the grave, whose graves were marked when the earthquake and the rocks rent and the graves were open, and when he arose, they arose and appeared to many in the streets of Jerusalem. They are up at the time of the harvest of the first fruits, and then, as the priest then processed the first fruits of the barley in the temple through the night, and the high priest, who must be in seclusion during this period of time, from when the Passover lamb was sacrificed until the first fruit offering was made, then Yeshua, having been raised from the dead on Shabbat, the next morning when Miriam comes to the grave, it's still dark, she thinks he's the gardener and says, "Sir, where have you taken the body, my Lord? Where have you put him?" He said, "Mary." She rushes at him to grab him by the feet. He says back, he says, "Don't touch me. I've not yet ascended to my Father in heaven." Then he said, "Go tell my disciples that I now ascend to my Father and their Father, to my God and their God, and then to meet me in the Galilee." Where is he going? To present the first fruits that were in the grave before the Father's throne in heaven, and is back on the earth to intercept the other women who come later with the burial spices, who meet the angel and are sent back to tell the disciples the same thing: he's gone. Yeshua meets them on the road. He says, "Yehovah saves you," ancient Hebrew Matthew, and they hold him by the feet now, because he's already returned from his priestly duties as the Kohen Gadol forever. Now, in the midst of the week, Yeshua literally is the fulfillment of all the sacrifices that were done. Remember, at Mount Sinai, Moses went up into the mountain. While he was gone, we built a golden calf. After entering into a blood covenant, which Moses spent all day sprinkling us all with blood, the scroll, the altar, everything was sprinkled with blood, then we were under a blood covenant. Whoever breaks the blood covenant dies. If Israel breaks the blood covenant, they die. If the Almighty breaks his covenant with Israel, he dies. Moses goes up to the mountain, receives the 10 commandments in stone, comes back down. The Almighty says, "Stand back, I'm going to kill them all. I'll start over with you." Moses says, "Figure something else out. You ain't starting over with me." The Almighty had to listen to him. He figures something else out. And as Hebrews says, that the sacrifices were instituted because of transgression. The blood of bulls and goats and lambs and rams can't take away sin. They're a constant reminder the death penalty is owed. Year after year, feast after feast. And then Yeshua, who never broke the covenant, died in the place of the guilty party so he can renew the covenant with us. That's what the renewed covenant in his blood is all about. Now we can be priests and kings because he has renewed the covenant with us. But what happened? Because the overspreading of transgressions in Israel, among the priests, the religious leaders, he made those sacrifices desolate on that level. That year, for the first time, and for the next 40 years, the Yom Kippur sacrifice, in which the scapegoat was taken out of the wilderness, pushed off, but yet the red cord that was around his neck put over the hekel, the door of the temple, when that scapegoat was pushed off, every year that scarlet cord turned snow white. It was a miracle that was put in place by revelation that went on for hundreds of years. But the rabbis all acknowledge and have to admit that 28 of the Common Era, when Yeshua was crucified, that scarlet ribbon never turned white again. That is why the rabbis come up with what has replaced the sacrifices, because even before the temple was destroyed, 40 years before, it was shown that the Almighty was no longer accepting the Yom Kippur sacrifice. Why? The Messiah, once he had paid the price, sat down at the right hand of the Almighty. Yeshua said the temple was going to be destroyed. He said it. Who destroyed it? Did Rome destroy the temple? No. The Almighty destroyed the temple. You don't think Rome is going to get away with doing something the Almighty has not ordained. You don't think that Nebuchadnezzar is going to get away with something the Almighty has not ordained. He calls Nebuchadnezzar my servant because he did what the Almighty said must come to pass. You transgress me, you're paying the price. He doesn't change. But he, the Messiah, wait, back here. 62 weeks, triumphal entry, the last day of the second week. 1 week, he's cut off in the midst of the week. 3 days and 3 nights in the grave. The next day begins the 64th week, but it's not the 64th week, it's the first day of the counting of the Omer. It is Yom HaBikurim. Now we count the 7 sevens. And then the day after is the fulfillment, Shavuot. 62 sevens. After 62 sevens, 1 7. In the midst of the 7, he's cut off. 3 days and 3 nights, now 7 sevens. It's all there, ladies and gentlemen. That's the third layer. And so you have to read this understanding now that there is more than one layer on this. And he who confirms the covenant is speaking of the Messiah, whose blood anoints the most holy. In that, he makes reconciliation for iniquity. He makes an end of sins, or the result of sin. The violation of Torah is sin. And what Yeshua did, the curse of violating the Torah is what? Death. Yeshua made an end to sins in this way, in that he paid the death penalty for the violation of the Torah. Do you see anything in here about the Antichrist making a land deal with Israel? No, it just isn't there, people. Now, let's look at it on another level. Because you can say that in the midst of the week, he shall cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations, he shall make it desolate even unto the consummation. Because when this is all ended, then is going to be restored. There will be sacrifices in the millennial reign of the Messiah. If these nations don't come up and worship the King Yehovah Tzavaot, it's not going to rain on them for a whole year. You know, these things are temporarily done away with and suspended. And what do the rabbis say? Prayers, good works, and offerings, that is what replaces the temple service. What do we say? Yeshua replaced the animal sacrifice because they were just a placeholder until the death penalty was paid. Now, 70 weeks are determined upon thy people. Now let's see what happened in history. According to Ezra chapter 7, Aviv 1 of the 7th year of the reign of Artaxerxes, which was 457 BC, that is when the commandment went forth for Israel to go forth and rebuild Jerusalem. This is the declaration that is repeated in Ezra chapter 7. It gives us the date, Aviv 1, the first day of the first month in the 7th year of his reign. And we know when the 7th year of his reign is because we know when Xerxes died within 2 days because of how they marked the courses and the heavenly bodies. And so we can go back and within 2 days, we can find out when his father died. Now it comes around to his coronation year. Then 7 years later, Aviv 1, 457 BC. What happens 7 years from then? That is Zerubbabel's temple. The walls rebuilt. The temple is rebuilt. In troublous times, Sanballat, all those up there in Samaria, they're coming against them. Yet Ezra, Nehemiah stand strong, and Zerubbabel's temple is built, not by night, not by power, but by his Spirit. It is accomplished. 7 sevens. Now you go 62 more sevens, and what do we come to? For a total of 69 sevens, we come to Aviv 1, 27 of the Common Era. That is when Yeshua walked out of the wilderness on that day. Yohanan ben Zechariah said, "Behold the Lamb of God, which takes away the sin of the world. This is the one that I told you about 41 days earlier. This is the one whom I saw the Spirit in the form of a dove descend upon him and remain upon him. This is the Son of God. This is the one of whom I heard the voice say, 'This is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased.'" This is a record in the 2nd chapter of the Gospel of John. 1st and 2nd chapter. And it was on Aviv 1, 27 of the Common Era, exactly 483 years to the day that the commandment to go forth and build Jerusalem took place. We've got 7 sevens. We've got 62 sevens. What's left? And he, the Messiah, will confirm the covenant with many for 1 7. Now this is where Eusebius wanted to come up with this has already all been fulfilled. And now the Pope, who is Constantine, who has named himself the Pontifex Maximus, which is the title of the high priest of paganism, the vicar of Christ, the instead of Christ, or in Latin, against Christ, Antichrist, proclaims that he is instead of the Messiah ruling from his millennial throne in Rome. That's why the Pope is trying to make the grab for more than 200 holy sites and to take over the Temple Mount. Because this messenger of Satan, this enemy of all that is righteous and holy, the unholy see, is making his play. Messiah will confirm the covenant for 1 7. And when he opens the eyes of Judah, at the culmination of this war, that there is no way that Israel will be able to survive. There's no place to run. There's no place to hide. And as the now deceased rabbi who was in charge of the Holocaust chamber on Mount Zion told me years and years ago, look around you in Jerusalem and in Israel today. In a few years, 2/3 of the people you see will be dead. Why? We have still refused to come back to the Torah. And the prophets tell us what is going to happen. Israel is going to be brought to the brink of destruction, and the Almighty is going to fight for Israel, but not without great bloodshed. At the culmination of this war, which I believe the ultimate where this will start is on Tishri 1. For 10 days, the 10 days of awe, it'll look like there's no hope. But on the holiest day of the year, the day that was set aside for the approaching of the Ark of the Covenant, is when the Almighty will fight from heaven, and the confirmation of the covenant in Yeshua's blood will be brought forth, and they will look on him of whom they have pierced. They will weep and they will wail as one weeps and wails for the death of their only son. They will understand that Yeshua is the Messiah. He was the prophet that they were supposed to hear and obey, but they didn't. He is the prophet that the Christians are supposed to hear and obey, but they don't. He is the prophet that nobody wants to listen to because they've got their own God-damned religion to protect. But he will have his way. He will shake the earth in the last days to deliver the sheep from the false shepherds. And they will hear his voice, and they will follow him. What transpires at the end of this war, in which the sun is darkened, the moon is turned to blood, and an army that before them it's a Garden of Eden, behind them it is a desolate wasteland, that the Almighty fights for Israel, and then he will pour out his Spirit upon all flesh. Sons and daughters will prophesy. Young men will dream dreams, old men dream dreams. Visions. The double portion of the Holy Spirit will be poured out upon those who stand and do what they have been called to do. Ladies and gentlemen, get ready for the confirmation of the covenant. I would like to pray. Abba, Father, thank you for this time that we have had to delve into the depth of your word. We thank you for your revelation, Yeshua. You said that you would work in us, you would do things, miraculous things that we would not even be able to comprehend. And now we see that you have worked so many things together so that we understand. And here we are at this point in time in which the world is shaking around us, and we know that you are in complete control. Take our lives and use us in your service all the days of our life, and may we hear the words on the sea of fire and glass. Good job, well done, faithful servant. Amen and amen. Shalom, Torah fans. I will see you on the sea of fire and glass when the smoke clears.